This will be a fun lesson. We are going to learn how to correctly use effects and filters we have in StickNodes. Also learning how to visually over-exaggerate movements of the camera and figures. We are going to start this lesson with using the camera. We see the stick figure plummet to the ground, right? So how can we use the camera to over-exaggerate this situation? If we shake the camera. Shaking the camera during the impact will show more power that was exerted onto the fall. Now let's show you how to actually do it. Once the stick figure impacts the ground, we move the camera just slightly, and even more slightly after. For camera shaking, you only need around 1 to 3 frames of camera movement. That's all it really needs. Now let's say we're working with tweening. Hold on, let me fix the stick figure so it won't show a tweening glitch. Alright, that's better. So it looks fine, I guess, when you turn on tweening and use camera shaking. But if you want it to look more rough, you can check the do not tween frame, the check mark, so it looks like the impact is more powerful. Using effects is actually pretty simple. So I've downloaded effect from the website. When using effects, the effect usually comes in a pack of multiple figures. You have to manually determine and place the effect so the effect looks like it makes sense. But when using tweening and using effect, it looks very flickery, like the effect is flickering. So to fix that, it's a pretty simple fix. You select the figure and check mark where it says keep stick figure during tween. So do that in every frame, select the figure and check mark that box, and you'll see that it will fix itself. But your effect will not be tweened because the AI isn't that smart to predict your effect. Now let's take a look at simple versus complex effects. Simple effects are just segments mainly used for liquid effects like blood, water, and sometimes lightning. But complex effects, it uses a lot of nodes and they're more detailed. And you usually find them in the website. Of course, you could create your own complex effect, but it's mainly used for effects such as explosions, fire, etc. So with simple effects, it's more harder to animate, but it's more controlled and more free to use. However, complex effects, they are easier to animate. They have a lot of variety, but it's less controlled and effects vary situation to situation. Now moving on, we're going to be using and creating movie clips. So movie clips are basically an animation inside your animation. Once you go into a movie clip menu, you get a whole other menu which you can make animation to implement into your project. There are a bunch of pre-made effects within the movie clip menu. Effects such as fire, smoke, lightning, action lines. When importing your movie clips, you can choose to hide or not hide the figures. Just choose to hide it because it will fill your stick figure imports with that movie clip effect. Then next you select animated when you add the effect, and you'll be good to go. Now let's learn how to properly use stick figure filters. I've gone over this in lesson 2. So first we're going to go over opacity, which is the transparency of the figure basically. You could also make cool transitions with this, like a fade in, fade out sequence. Another use for opacity could be lighting. In this case, we're making the polyfill look like the sun is shining on the background and on the figure. Next filter is blurring. So let's use my animation as an example on how we can implement the blur effect. Have both horizontal, vertical, or just horizontal or just vertical. We can increase the blur till like 2. That's how much it can go. Obviously, when a subject moves quickly to the x-axis, then blur horizontally, but if it moves to the y-axis, then blur it vertically. But don't overdo it, please, I beg of you. It's so easy to overdo a blur. Now I've added the blur to my intro. There's a very slight difference, but still, it's a great filter. Now on to the other effects. So next up we have the invert. This can be good for impact frames and slow-mo scenes. Hue shift, you don't have to really worry about that. Saturation, it can darken the figure or brighten up the figure. Now this is especially very useful for background design. You can automatically change the vibe of a background. Let's look at these examples right here. This background looks jovial with its highly saturated buildings and a bright sky. This background looks gloomy with its use of desaturation and a more darkened sky. Now let's look at the next important filter, which is the tint. Let's get a background, and you can see that we can't really change the stick figure color because it has a node, just one node. So if we go to our tint, we can say change the color to red. Now we have our red room. We can actually create 3D objects using StickNodes, 3D cubes using polyfill, and make 3D buildings or pyramids. Polyfill is the best way to create any 3D figure or animation. I'll provide a short little tutorial on how to make a 3D cube in StickNodes. How fun. Alright, here are our key takeaways for this lesson. So we learned more about camera work, shaking the camera, right? And using effects, troubleshooting effects when using tweening, the types of effects, simple versus complex, and using the movie clip effects. And we know how to use the stick figure filters when it is necessary, and knowing the more important filters. And we know how to put 3D into 2D animation using those 3D cubes. Your action step is to make a 3D building using that 3D cube tutorial that I edited in, and try out one of the effects.